so that it's not about just doing things for the sake of changing, but that there's a system in which they can say, okay, here's an idea I have where I think we can do things better. Now let me actually go test that in a low stakes environment. And then ultimately, you can then improve on things when you show evidence that a new way of doing things is better.
What's the secret to hiring and retaining next generation of employees?
That's a great question. One of the big things that you want to make sure to do is focus on engagement. So, a number of studies show that when employees are learning new things, they are more engaged at work. The other thing that's particularly interesting is this thing that happens early in the careers of most employees. Generation typically doesn't matter, but specifically with today's generation of young employees, is being able to move between uh, learning experiences and giving them exposure to different things that happen in your company, and then transitioning to impact. And so early in employees' careers, they want to learn as much. They're kind of sponges. I want an experience doing this, and I want an experience doing that. But over time, there's this transition happens where you want to be able to use a sports analogy, put points on the board, make some kind of impact. And I remember in my own career, the first about decade of my career, I worked at AT&T, a very large global company. And I had a lot of that initial exposure and experience and learning. But then when it came time for me to have impact on the business, there was so much bureaucracy and red tape involved that it was very hard for me to actually get things done. In particular, in my career, I was focused on an education go-to-market at AT&T for elementary school kids, tablets with a lot of education content. And I was given the task of going and building that go-to-market model. And I ended up signing letters of intent with 10 or 12 different major brands. 22 months into the contract negotiation with that first company, I decided to leave and go work on other ventures. But during that time, the company that we were negotiating a contract with had launched two major products and got acquired by another bigger company, and we couldn't even get a contract signed.
How can businesses better facilitate innovative thinking?
So it's about creating an environment where employees are given the opportunity to make things better, to even if it's some big leaps and changes, but also more evolutionary optimization within their jobs. So a lot of times employees are put in a position where they're given certain responsibilities, there's certain tasks they have to do, they have to stay sort of within that box. They're not given the opportunity to test new ideas to see if they can make things better. So there's an element of process that needs to be created, as well as an element of culture that needs to show that it's acceptable to push to do things new, to test out new ways of doing things. One thing I talk about in particular is this notion of intelligent risk taking. So sometimes when people talk about innovation, they think, okay, it's just about sort of throwing a wrench in the way we're doing things now and just intentionally doing things differently for the sake of doing things differently, and then ultimately taking a bunch of risk. But I talk about this notion of building or giving opportunities for intelligent risk taking, so that it's not about just doing things for the sake of changing, but that there's a system in which they can say, okay, here's an idea I have where I think we can do things better. Now let me actually go test that in a low stakes environment, and then ultimately you can then improve on things when you show evidence that a new way of doing things is better. So I will give a great example, something that I know every company loves to do. I say that sarcastically every year, which is budgeting. The way that most budgeting works is, and I think most of us would have this experience. You are given the budget usually at the end of the previous year when the decisions are made, and then you get toward the end of that year and you realize, oh no, I have money that I haven't spent yet. I need to go spend all of that money. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get as much money next year. And then there's a big rush to spend things probably not on the best things possible. And so ultimately, you are rewarded for spending the money that you were given so you can ask for more later. Instead of creating systems to really optimize that. And so companies can do something as simple as saying, okay, if you would like to ask for the same amount of money you had before or more, you have to prove that you're being more efficient with the money that you've been given this past year. And so part of that is then creating structures to allow for that to happen, like with budgeting, and creating the culture where people are allowed to test new things and optimize and do things better.
What are the key qualities of good management?
So a lot of times when it comes to management and leadership, a lot of focus is on vision, setting goals, and then motivation or empowerment, getting people motivated to be able to do their role. But one of the things that is often overlooked that in my experience, in my career, and watching and interacting with leaders from across the world, is there's this third pillar that's missing that really deserves a lot of focus. And that is around removing obstacles. And so in my career in particular, I have gone into different leadership positions in different functions, from customer service to marketing to operations to sales to strategy. And I've worked in telecommunications. I have worked in e-commerce, in mobile technology, in more new nascent technologies and things around crowdfunding and other trends. And I've always been able to go into situations where I may have no idea what my employees are actually doing, but I basically focus on understanding how they're doing their work now and the obstacles that are keeping them from doing their work better. And so eliminating those obstacles is not only something that helps people actually perform better, but it creates better morale because people are realized, okay, my manager is there to help me do my job better. And there's lots of different tactics you can use to do that. One of them, and I learned this in probably one of the least sexy environments out there, which was a unionized call center where everyone had to be on the phone all the time, calls coming in. It was in a union environment, there's certain dynamics you have to work with there, and naturally there are a lot of complaints that people have because things aren't necessarily the best work environment. And so what I did was I implemented this thing in my team meetings that I called the venting session. And so what happened was I would sit and listen, and basically I would ask people what some of the problems were that they were experiencing in their work. And it was very important. I made sure I didn't, in response to things they said, I didn't make excuses. And the only time I really said anything was to clarify, to make sure I understood what they said. I remember the first time I did this in a team meeting, it took 45 minutes. And then I took what I learned, and then I went and just discovered a little bit of certain decisions that I could make or certain things we could do to change things for the better. And I would also invariably learn that there are certain things that couldn't be changed because of policy or otherwise. And then I would go back and report to the team the next week we had a meeting. And the response was amazing. So, one, they were obviously did their job better when I removed some of those obstacles for them. But also morale was great because they realized their boss was there to help them do their job better. And as time went on, the venting sessions got shorter and shorter. I think 3 or 4 months in, when it came time for the venting session, everyone kind of said, "No, we're good. Things are great." And that was from a very hostile initial first meeting all the way through. And occasionally over time, something would come up that I could help with. Sometimes I could change it, sometimes I couldn't. But the effort that I was making to remove those obstacles really helped the team's performance and morale.
You talk about intelligent risk taking. How do you define intelligent risk taking, and what are the benefits?
So really what intelligent risk taking means, and a lot of this has to do with innovation, because some people think, okay, innovation is just about messing up the way we're doing things now and sometimes needlessly making changes. But you need to create a system to allow for changes to happen. What I like to say is that if you are not willing to challenge the way that you do business, someone else will. And one fact that I'd like to reference, U.S. example, the Standard & Poor's 500, the S&P 500 largest companies. If you go back to 20 years ago, more than half of the companies on the list 20 years ago are not on the list today. And so what that means is the companies that were the titans of things, they often are not designed, if they don't have the process, to allow for intelligent risk taking to continue to stay at that level. Classic example would be Kodak, the photography company. So they actually had developed a lot of the underlying technology for digital photography back decades ago. But when it came time to actually use it, they said, well, we kind of make our money right now in processing and selling film. If we do this digital photography thing, no one's going to buy our film and no one's going to pay us to process our film. So we're not going to do that. And now, not only is Kodak not one of those biggest companies in the world, but they did not implement any of the technology that many other companies took, even though they had created it. And so it's important to create those systems and the mentality to say, we need to take risks to challenge the way we do business, otherwise someone else will. And so ultimately, you need to allow with processes and this culture to say, let's test out ways to change things. Let's have a process to prove when things work and they don't work. And let's reward people when they take intelligent risk taking. Now, the reason why it's important to reward the risk taking as opposed to the results is because that mentality on a regular basis is what's going to create success. Often in a team environment, when something goes wrong, the first thing you do is point fingers. Oh, that wasn't me. It was this person. They're the one to blame. And if you create this environment of intelligent risk taking, it's less about pointing fingers and more about collectively having this attitude that we're going to constantly always make things better. And so it's about rewarding that activity instead of just the end result.
What do you hope audiences take away from your public speeches?
So for me, the biggest and most important thing, without a doubt, is practical application. So, obviously there are some great stories and examples used, and to a certain extent, motivate your audience to take action. But it's not just about getting up there and cheering everyone on and having, a big rah-rah type scenario. It's more about how do you take the concepts we're talking about and actually directly apply them in your business. And so that's the most important thing I focus on all the topics I talk about, is how do you take that idea and use it in your day-to-day work to help actually have an impact on your business.